Welcome to day 8 of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology. In this series, we're talking about kings called Bran and trying to figure out whether they have more in common than their name. That provides us with an excuse to enjoy a bit of story every day and then take a wander through the thrift stores and charity shops of Celtic lore for something that is either beautiful or useful. There may be some mixed metaphors along the way. I've been really enjoying the comments that you guys have been leaving, especially the competitors in the challenge. And I really appreciate your willingness to answer the challenge questions. The people taking part in that are just amazing and tenacious. And no matter what I ask you, you mostly keep your grip on things and give me good answers. So I'll try not to let the power of being the questioner go to my head. A few of you do need to be careful, though, that you're actually addressing the question I ask, so be aware of that. I'm not looking to eliminate people, but, if it goes too far, then it would happen. So if the question is, do you want tea or coffee? Then if you answer by saying, well, I think it's probably Tuesday, do you see what I mean? You've gone way off the mark of what I've asked. So that is a problem. Or just to say, well, I have no opinion. That's not quite good enough. So back on day 6, I introduced James Carney's theory about the Mongan material, and I asked you what you thought about it. And he made some of you a bit angry, and I'm very sympathetic to that. But I'd also say, never be afraid to look for the truth. Never be afraid to look at another side of the argument. That's how people get really entrenched in weirdness. It's by refusing to listen to other points of view. If your belief can't stand a little bit of scrutiny, or a few challenges, then they probably aren't worth having in the first place. So there are two kinds of anti-nativism, I think. One comes from an inability to see any kind of God in anything. So any writing about any God, including the Christian one, is either just literature, just a creative story, or it's religious propaganda. That's one way that people respond to this material as scholars and as lay people as well. Another kind of anti-nativism seems to come from the idea that the monastic scribes were somehow incapable of wanting to preserve any non-Christian story. But if you actually visit a monastery, you'll find that even though they all dress alike, they don't all think alike. They're still individuals with different worldviews and different nerdy interests. And the same goes for Celtic studies scholars. Anyway, where was I? Don't be afraid of the truth. Knowledge is power. I don't want to build my religious ideas on shaky ground. Both nativist and anti-nativist scholars are often guilty of starting from an assumption so big that they can't see the gaping holes in their theories. And you can learn a lot from observing them. At the same time, their commitment to studying these old texts and writing about them in lucid detail is an enormous gift to us. So that was the Sunday sermon. Now, what about our story? Yesterday, we began the story of Bran the Blessed, King of Britain, King of the Island of the Mighty. And we heard how the Irish king, Matholwch, came and asked Bran for Bran's sister, Branwen, hoping that their marriage would create a strong alliance between the two islands. A council was held, and this offer was accepted, although I'm not sure that anyone asked Branwen's opinion, let alone her consent. Certainly not mentioned. Matholwch had come with a great retinue of men and horses in his 13 ships, and it was necessary to billet all these men and horses in the surrounding countryside during his visit. When Bran's troublesome half-brother Evnissyen saw the many strange horses, and discovered that the marriage had taken place without anyone consulting him, he flew into a rage and set about brutally slashing and mutilating Matholach's horses. And that's where we left things. So let's continue. Matholach's men quickly told him what had happened to the horses, how they had no further enjoyment to be got from them. This act has humiliated you, Lord, and we believe that was the intention behind it. This makes no sense, said Matholach as he tried to digest the gravity of the situation. God knows why they would first give me a woman of such high status and beauty, beloved of all her kindred, and then insult me so. The counsel Matholach was given by his men was to leave Britain at once. He agreed and ordered his men to board the ships, but when Bran heard about the sudden departure, he sent word to Matholach and asked why he was leaving. God knows, said Matholach, I wish I had never set foot on this island, only to receive the worst insult imaginable. I cannot understand why you would give me Branwen, one of the 3 great ladies of the Island of the Mighty, only to insult me like this after I slept with her. If they wished to attack me, why did they give me Branwen for my wife? This insult didn't come from the king, said the messengers. Indeed, he knows nothing of it, and the insult to himself is as great as the insult to you. So Matholach could see some truth in this, but he said that there seemed to be no remedy for this insult. Now that it was done, it couldn't be undone. So all of this was related to Bran, who called Manawydan to deliver a message to Matholach. Tell him that I will replace every horse that was lost to him, first of all. Further, I will offer his full honor price for this insult in silver and gold, as the laws require. Tell him what kind of man Evnissyen is, and that I had no knowledge of his actions until now. Tell him that Evnissyen is my own half-brother, and that I am unable to have him put to death for this. Tell him that if he will meet me, I will try to make peace with him on the terms he chooses. Manawydan delivered that message, and Matholach spoke with his counselors. The opinion was that there was greater shame in not accepting the compensation, so they returned to the court. Every care was now taken by Bendigeidfran that Matholach and his people should be shown kindness and hospitality. Tents and pavilions were erected, and they began a feast, but Matholach's spirits were very low, where before he had been cheerful and talkative. You're very quiet, said Bran. I don't think you find your honor price sufficient, or you'd be in better spirits. I will increase it until you are satisfied, and we will bring horses to you first thing tomorrow morning. May God repay you, Matholach replied. I want to give you something further, said Bendigeidfran. Come look at this fine cauldron. It is far from ordinary. It has a special property, you see. You can use it to revive your dead warriors. Just throw them into the cauldron, and by the next day, they're as good as new. Well, only they can't talk. Matholach thanked Bran, and after that, he did seem to cheer up a bit. The next day, horses were collected from far and wide to replace the Irish horses. These were Matholach's to keep forever, and they were counted until Matholach said that the tally was correct. After that, the place where they finished this count was known as Tal Ebolion, place of the horse counting. So it seems like Matholach and Branwen's marriage is off to a rocky start, through no fault of their own. Weddings are really dangerous, liminal times. Trying to mix 2 families, high emotions, a lot can go wrong. It's no wonder that we try to protect ourselves with so many traditions and superstitions when we have a wedding. Don't you hate it, though, when one guy ruins everything? So we'll find out tomorrow whether Branwen and Matholach can weather this storm when they barely know each other. So this story, as I mentioned, is the second branch of the Mabinogi. Some of you probably wonder what a Mabinogi is and why it has branches. So let's look at that. You may have a copy of the Mabinogion at home. This is a collection of 11 stories, which are found in two different manuscripts from the 14th century, called the Red Book of Hergest and the White Book of Rutherk. And there were probably earlier copies of these texts, maybe going back another century or two. As you might have heard, the name is a mistake based on a misunderstanding, which starts in the 19th century or in the 14th century, depending on how you look at it. Charlotte Guest often gets blamed for this, but she didn't start it. She actually inherited this problem. She wasn't the first person to translate these stories into English. She was just one who turned it into a Victorian bestseller. So the name Mabinogion stuck, and we're kind of stuck with it. It's overly pedantic to worry about it now. So the 11 stories are divided into 3 groups. The 4 branches are a set of stories which share some characters and sort of follow on from one another, but they can each stand on their own. These stories are really more literature than myth, but they definitely contain echoes of myth. Some of the character names relate to the names of Celtic deities found elsewhere, and some of the stories have parallels in Irish mythological literature. The 3 romances are Arthurian stories, and they have quite a bit in common with some of the Arthurian stories from continental Europe. However, these stories are very much the Welsh take on things, and obviously contain some echoes of the earliest layer of Welsh material about Arthur, kind of mixed in. So these probably don't echo myths about deities the way the 4 branches do, but the deeper you get into all this, the more you might find them worth studying for the odd nugget. These stories aren't a sequence at all, even though they share some characters. Now, the native tales are kind of the miscellaneous department. Some of these stories contain strong mythological echoes. If you watch season 2 of the 12 Days, I devote the whole series to Killich and Olwen for that reason. These 4 stories are a real mixed bag, though. Each one is a unique gem, and they're all pretty strange, if you're here for the strangeness. So we are here. Branwen, daughter of Llŷr, the second branch of the Mabinogi. You don't need to know what happened in the first branch to understand the second branch. However, studying the 4 branches together when you're ready is really fruitful. And I may make some comparisons during the next days between this branch and the others as we go. So I'll do my best to explain what I'm talking about when I do that. The 4 branches have a lot of common themes within them. There are magicians and magical objects, a couple of visits to the other world, and people turned into animals. There's a wedding of some kind in every branch, and mothers and sons. Mothers separated from sons. Births are often troublesome events. And there are young men who haven't got much wisdom running around bumping into things. So while the 4 branches don't offer us much of a sequential plot line from one branch to the next, you can learn a lot about the depth of the 4 branches by kind of comparing them to each other. And then you'll begin to see that they are a cohesive whole. Rather than being a story, which starts at branch 1 and ends at branch 4, there is an arc of, I don't know, almost like philosophy or something like that. There's definitely an arc of meaning as we move through the 4 branches. How is the wedding and marriage of Rhiannon to Puich in the first branch different from the marriage of Branwen and Matholach, or Math and Goewin? Is there a developing theme concerning the treatment of women, or the problems of being a king from the first branch to the 4th branch? Are there themes about sovereignty and the changing relationship of humans in the medieval period to sovereignty from the beginning to the end of the 4 branches? So you can simply treat these stories as love stories or adventures, but if you do, you miss the depth. At the same time, I'd remind you of what I said earlier, that the 4 branches isn't quite mythology. It's more like the first echo we can hear of that mythology. As such, I prefer to exercise a bit of caution when assuming that all the female characters are goddesses, which is a legacy we've inherited from the mid-20th century paganism, where people assumed that these stories were pure myth, and therefore the characters must be deities. So there isn't a simple litmus test for divinity. I wrote a long piece about this not too long ago. I'll share the link today in case you'd like to read it. I'm not here to tell you which ones are gods and goddesses. I'll just counsel you not to jump to conclusions. Now, we need a question. I promised to say more about the harm done to the horses in yesterday's section, and I will eventually. But what do you think? Like, specifically, I'd like you to think about Evnishian's motivation. Why did he do that? Is he just a psycho? I mean, yes, he is a psycho. There's no excuse for what he did. But could there be underlying reasons for his anger about Branwen's marriage? So let's give it some deep consideration and put those thoughts in the comments. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.